In addition to this maturation cycle I see in evolution, it's also very important to recognize the embeddedness of living systems within each other. So our bodies are made up of cells within organ systems within a whole body. And we can see that every level of this holarchy, these are holons within a holarchy, terminology from Arthur Koestler, and we can see that the self-interest of every level can be expressed, and that what happens is that pushes negotiations toward a cooperative overall system. So self-interest is good as long as it's contained by the self-interest of a community. You see, that makes us always be aware of other levels. And if we can learn this as humans, to say when we're making a decision, is this good for me, for my family, for my ecosystem, for my nation, for my world? And then if it's good at some levels and at least harmless at others, like the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, then go ahead and try it. You're a creative human being. In evolution, we see that every time the Earth has had a huge crisis, like an extinction, then afterwards we've had an explosion of new life. Not slow, accidental Darwinian lineages, but an explosion of all kinds of new life, like the Cambrian explosion, where suddenly multi-celled creatures appear in the evolutionary record, many different types at once. Or after the last extinction, when the dinosaurs went extinct, we see a flowering of all the different kinds of mammals afterwards, not one giving rise to the other, but chains of them, many chains of them at once emerging. So human creativity now in our big crisis, and we are causing the latest big extinction. We're extinguishing creatures faster than that meteor that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. This is a big crisis, a huge crisis that we've created, and we have to let all the different cultures express their self-interest and their understanding of the situation. What we have now in the world, because our biggest problem is really economics, is a World Trade Organization that's trying to dictate to the countries how they should behave economically, what they can produce and what they can export. What we have to recognize is that we need glocalization rather than globalization, local and global flourishing at once. So if the World Trade Organization functions at the expense of the local economies, it's just like a body trying to run at the expense of its cells. So that awareness has to come about, that the negotiations of the cycle can happen simultaneously among levels of a body or a world economy. We also have some practices in our world economy today that don't work very well, like genetically modified foods. You see, DNA is a worldwide information system, and genes, which are pieces of DNA, are tradable among all creatures. My genes and the genes of this plant are interchangeable. I breathe in new genes all the time in viruses, in bacteria, in plasmids, in prions. All kinds of them are flowing through my body all the time. And it appears that we have an intelligent genome. We know now there are what biologists call repair genes. When there's accidental damage to the genome, it's immediately repaired. Otherwise, these errors would build up and you wouldn't be able to function for a whole lifetime. So we now know there are editor genes when DNA is copied that make sure it's copied correctly, that there are repair genes fixing any damage done. So we have to give up the Darwinian notion that evolution occurs through accidents and trust that the genome is intelligent. We see it's intelligent. We have 100 trillion cells in our bodies, and each one of them has 30,000 recycling centers renewing our proteins. They're so high-tech that they can take in a protein, disassemble it, build a new protein, perhaps quite a different kind, and issue the new protein. That's as if we could stick trees into a chipper machine and get a live tree out the other side. Very high-tech. We're not nearly as high-tech yet as our own internal micro-world. So we have a great deal to learn from nature, and Take economics. If we ran our body's economy the way our world economy works, it might look something like this. You call the heart-lung system the northern industrial organs, and you give them ownership of the bones in which you mine the raw material blood cells that arise in the marrow. Sweep them up here to the northern industrial organs, purify the blood as actually happens, add oxygen, and then the heart distribution center announces the body price for blood today is so much, who will buy? And you ship the blood to the organs that can afford it, and not all can. This is the situation we have economically in the world today, and you can see that a living system can't function that way. Getting back to genetically modified foods, the DNA has been traded from ancient times in the bacterial world among species. But it's an intelligent trading system, and it knows what to take in, what not to take in, what to release. When we started to implant genes in other genomes, first of all, we harnessed bacteria and viruses that were capable of carrying DNA into cells to do the work for us. And we'd plant the genes in that way. And then the next time we looked at what was happening in those plants that were modified that way, we saw that gene was gone. It had disappeared. So it took many years to figure out how to get genes to stay in place when we put them in there. Unfortunately, our genetic engineers think that you can stick a new screw in place in the machine and change it that way. But it's not a mechanical system. They're intelligent systems. They can detect the gene that doesn't belong and get rid of it. So they were throwing the genes out. What we do now essentially is to shoot them in under pressure with a kind of crazy glue attached and force the genomes to accept these genes. And the good research is showing that the whole organism reacts kind of the way flesh hardens and gets red around a splinter, that the entire organism can be disrupted by this, because it's passed to all its cells. And we find that rats, for instance, fed on genetically modified foods versus natural ones, that their organs begin to shrink and get leathery. But research scientists who discover these few things we know about it tend to get fired, because the research is usually funded by the big corporations that are doing the work. So we're in trouble with genetically modified food. In Mexico, the wild stalks of corn are now polluted, even though the company scientists had said the pollen wouldn't carry the modified genes that far, but it did. In Canada, we have farmers sued for having genetically engineered crops in their fields. When they did not steal or plant them, they blew in on the wind. In the United States, we can no longer guarantee organic soy or corn because the stalks are so polluted. So the genie's out of the bottle, and we can't stop it. Europe is being much more sensible in rejecting these foods because the research on their effects on people over time are absolutely inadequate. We do know that some of the genetically modified foods are interfering with people's medications. It's certainly enough to warrant a ceasefire on this until we know far more about it, and until we understand life better and possibly can make good use of such technologies, learning from the natural world that's been trading genes for so long.